Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a magnifying glass to the most, well, persistent and frustrating parts of being human. Today, we are really getting into why we cling to pain.
It's such a classic human dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see it absolutely everywhere. People idealizing memories of, I mean, genuinely stressful times, all-nighters in college, that
Yeah.
chaotic first apartment. Or, and this is the more troubling part, returning again and again to relationships that they know, rationally, are dysfunctional.
And what we learn from the sources is this is not just about, weakness or making bad choices. This attachment to suffering is a very real biological thing. We're talking cognitive bias, neurochemistry that looks a lot like addiction, and the deep, deep wiring of our attachment systems.
Absolutely. The research spans decades. We have
Yeah.
everything from memory reconstruction theories all the way to detailed brain scans of people going through heartbreak. Our mission today is to show you why your brain often prefers that familiar suffering over an unfamiliar and maybe untested piece.
Okay, so let's start with the first big hurdle, the past. Why does the past, even when it was really difficult, always look so much better than right now? We have to understand the brain's lying historian.
We do.
Oh.
And we need to introduce a concept called rosy retrospection. This is a reliably documented cognitive bias where
Yeah.
when we look back, we systematically remember past experiences as being way more positive than they actually were.
Yeah.
The confusion, the stress, all that daily grind,
Hmm.
it just seems to fade away.
Right. It's the difference between remembering a miserable camping trip as this character-building adventure
Huh.
and remembering the actual moment you were soaking wet, freezing, and, wondering why you ever left the house.
Precisely. And that happens because memory, and this is fundamental, is reconstruction, not a fixed replay.
Yeah.
Your brain isn't pulling up a perfect objective video file of what happened. When you remember something, you rebuild it from fragments, emotions, beliefs, little sensory bits, and your current self gets to edit the script.
Okay, so if my current self is the editor, what's getting prioritized? Why is the stressful part always getting cut out of the final film?
It's a mechanism called the fading effect bias. Research shows that the intensity of the negative emotions tied to a memory decays much, much faster than the positive ones. Your brain prioritizes holding on to the meaning of the experience or the lesson, and it prunes away that unpleasant emotional static that might stop you from trying something similar again.
That's brilliant, actually. It's like emotional regulation is built right into the memory system itself. It lets you keep the strength you gained from surviving something without having to relive the anxiety that defined it.
And this feeds directly into how we now understand nostalgia. Nostalgia used to be seen as, like, a sickness, but now we see it as a crucial psychological resource. When you feel lonely or anxious, pulling up a rosy memory of the past literally boosts your feelings of social connection. It strengthens your sense of who you are.
It's a quick comfort button.
It is. It acts as a buffer against all that existential stress.
But that comfort definitely comes at a price. This whole system sets us up for a comparison trap, doesn't it? The past just always seems better than the present.
It does. Because the present moment is, by definition, messy. It's unresolved. It's emotionally ambiguous. The past, though, is a finished product. Its uncertainties are all resolved. The brain loves that feeling of psychological closure, even if getting there requires a little historical revisionism.
So the brain is choosing the certainty of a resolved story over the messy truth of what actually happened. I get that. But what about relationships that are actively painful right now? That feels like a whole different kind of biological wiring.
It is. And this is where we move directly from cognitive bias into the hard science of dependency and addiction. When we talk about a relationship breakup, the scientific consensus is clear. The acute emotional pain of that loss often feels subjectively more intense than physical pain.
How is that even possible? How can emotional pain be biologically the same as, I don't know, a physical injury?
Because in an evolutionary sense, social pain is a physical injury. Neuroimaging studies show that social rejection activates a very specific social pain network in the brain. We're talking about the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the DACC. What's fascinating is that the activation in the DACC shows a remarkable overlap with the brain systems that process physical pain.
Wow. So when you feel that crushing literal ache in your chest after a breakup, your brain is treating the loss of connection like a survival threat, the same way it would treat a broken leg.
Exactly. Connection was safety, loss is damage. Now, layer on top of that the chemical system that built the connection in the first place, dopamine.
The pleasure hit.
Right. Romantic love, especially in that early phase, is tied to this massive surge of dopamine in your brain's reward centers, like the nucleus accumbens. That partner becomes an incredibly powerful, predictable source of reward. When that reward is suddenly taken away, the system goes into acute distress. It's a neurological state that looks a lot like withdrawal from drug addiction.
That explains the desperation. That frantic impulse to check their social media, to send one more text, even when you know it's a terrible idea. If it's just a fix, why does it feel so bad? What overrides the rational part of your brain that knows contacting them will only hurt you more?
Because the initial urge, or even just seeing a photo of them, can trigger a tiny little microburst of dopamine. It's a temporary fix. This creates a compulsive reinforcement cycle. You're essentially training your brain to seek that little bit of relief, even if the net result is hours of agonizing over it later. That rapid dopamine crash after the fix contributes directly to anhedonia, that low motivation, that feeling of blah, and then depression.
And the withdrawal isn't just about the lack of pleasure, it's also the confusion from the bonding chemicals, right? Oxytocin and vasopressin.
Their role is incredibly complex. While they establish that deep bond, the sources show that after a breakup, the levels of oxytocin, the main bonding hormone, can actually stay elevated for a while.
Yeah.
So your conscious mind knows it's over, but your deep biology is still pumping out the hormone that's screaming, stay connected, fix this. That internal chemical contradiction is what fuels that intense, irrational longing.
That synthesis is just crucial. When you're struggling to just get over it, you're not just being emotional, you're fighting against millions of years of evolutionary programming and this powerful addiction-like neurochemistry.
You are. The whole system is designed to keep you attached. Adapting to the absence of that person takes real biological time for those circuits to quiet down.
Okay, now we have to get into the even deeper paradox here. Why do we sometimes, through a series of choices, actively seek out relationships that we know will hurt us? This brings us to the compulsion to repeat and the strange comfort of chaos.
This is where psychology really meets neurology. The core idea here is repetition compulsion. It's this unconscious drive to repeatedly reenact a traumatic event or a painful relationship dynamic. It looks chaotic from the outside, but the brain is actually trying to master or, fix the original trauma by controlling the outcome this time.
It's like trying to win the final level of a terrible old video game. You know all the moves, you know the frustration, but you think, I have to beat it this time.
Exactly. And the reason we're drawn to this pattern comes from what we call the familiarity of chaos. If chaos or emotional distance or inconsistent behavior was the norm in your childhood, if that's the first environment your nervous system learned to navigate, then your brain literally codes that environment as normal.
So the nervous system mistakes familiarity for safety, even if that familiarity includes a lot of pain.
That is the emotional home concept right there. Your threat detection system, the amygdala, prioritizes the known experience, however painful, over the good experience that is unfamiliar and untested. A healthy, calm, secure relationship can feel dangerously boring, or even suspicious. Staying stuck in chaos becomes a kind of perverse survival strategy.
And this is the engine that drives a trauma bond.
Right. Trauma bonds are these intense emotional connections that grow out of a cycle of abuse, and they're maintained by two key factors: a power imbalance and intermittent reinforcement.
Okay, let's use the classic analogy here from behavioral science. The rat in the cage.
It's a perfect illustration. If a rat presses a lever and only sometimes gets food, unpredictably, it becomes obsessively attached to that lever. It'll neglect everything else. In human terms, the unpredictable granting of needs, love, affection, commitment, mixed in with neglect or abuse, creates an addiction that is far stronger than consistent love ever could be.
Because that one scrap of validation feels like hitting the jackpot, and the hope of that next fix keeps you perpetually chasing the reward.
And that chase is what makes the whole dynamic so corrosive. You become, in a sense, owned by the relationship, desperately trying to figure out the abuser's pattern just so you can control the outcome. You abandon your own boundaries and your own identity in the process. Intermittent reinforcement isn't just a motivator, it's a powerful tool of manipulation that exploits the brain's deep need for certainty.
This brings us to some newer research that really shifts the focus away from the victim's psychology and onto the perpetrator's strategy. Tell us about weaponized attachment.
This new framework reconceptualizes the trauma bond not as some irrational pathology of the victim, but as a sophisticated strategic system of coercive control that's deliberately engineered by the abuser. The sources on weaponized attachment suggest that the emotional dependency is established long before any overt abuse even starts.
How do they do that? How is that built?
Through these pattern tactics designed to bypass your normal emotional safeguards. Two examples really stand out. First, intense, premature trauma sharing, which creates a false sense of instant, deep intimacy. And second, establishing the two-faced soulmate profile, where the abuser alternates between intense affection and sudden, unexplained withdrawal or hostility.
So they build the cage of dependency before they ever show you the bars of the abuse. The bond itself becomes the weapon.
Precisely. And this reframing is so critical for healing because it moves the analysis away from, why do I keep choosing this? And focuses it on, I was trapped in an intentionally deceptive system. It helps remove that self-blame that so often gets in the way of recovery.
So, okay, we have the brain constantly revising the past. We have the chemical dependency of heartbreak and this deep neurological comfort of familiar chaos. It feels overwhelming. But the good news is that the human brain is also incredibly plastic.
It is. The whole recovery process hinges on neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, to form new neural connections. Those initial maladaptive, addictive responses will, with consistent effort, eventually adapt to the absence of the old pattern or partner.
What are the key cognitive tools we can use to help that change along?
We have two really powerful mechanisms. First is memory reconsolidation. Remember how we said memory is rebuilt every time you access it? Well, when you recall those painful relationship-related memories, they become temporarily changeable, modifiable. This provides an opportunity to revise the memory and reduce its emotional intensity.
So revisiting the memory in a safe context, like therapy, can actually help you rewrite the emotional punch it delivers.
It lets you reduce the emotional payload of the memory without erasing the content. The second tool is cognitive reappraisal. This is simply the ability to reinterpret emotionally charged situations in less distressing ways.
Can you give us a practical example? If someone is replaying an old relationship and thinking, I wasted 5 years of my life, how does reappraisal change that narrative?
That's exactly where your prefrontal cortex, the executive rational part of your brain, exerts that top-down control. Instead of wasted time, you cognitively reframe it. I gained 5 years of critical data on what my boundaries are and what I absolutely will not accept in a future partner. You're changing the meaning of the event, and when you change the meaning, you change the emotional hit.
And this is why approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness are so effective. They're essentially training your prefrontal cortex to get stronger.
Absolutely. They are literally teaching the brain how to inhibit its own primitive attachment urges. And we shouldn't underestimate physical intervention. Physical exercise promotes neuroplasticity by increasing brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. We call it fertilizer for your brain cells. Movement makes your brain more ready to change.
And finally, to break that rat in the cage dynamic, the consistency you provide for yourself has to be absolute.
It must be. The core strategy of intermittent reinforcement is chaos and unpredictability. The only healing strategy is consistency and clarity. You have to become relentlessly consistent with your own boundaries to fully disengage from that control dynamic. You're retraining your nervous system that you are the source of safety, not some unpredictable external reward.
So what does this all mean for you, for the listener who might be struggling right now?
It means this. The brain romanticizes the past, not to lie to you, but to protect your emotional stability and maintain your sense of self. You sought familiar chaos because, tragically, your nervous system learned to mistake that chaos for survival. But that ancient mechanism isn't needed anymore.
The ultimate takeaway here is that you are not weak for struggling to let go of an idealized past or a chaotic relationship. You're struggling against powerful, sophisticated psychological protection systems, against chemical withdrawal, against deep neurological pathways designed to prioritize the familiar. Your difficulty is proof of the immense power of your own biology, not a measure of your failure.
True healing is recognizing that the intense pain of loss evolved to motivate relationship maintenance and survival. But now your new goal is not just mere survival, it's conscious, secure connection based on consistent self-worth.
So what does a life look like when it is driven by consistent values and secure connection, rather than by intermittent fear and the frantic chase for a temporary dopamine hit? That's your deep dive homework. We'll see you next time.